and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and it's a real pleasure to be joined by Tara O'Sullivan. Tara is a highly accomplished marketing leader who has over 25 years experience in the B2B technology and marketing landscape, specialized, I think, Tara, in product marketing, demand generation, and of course, revenue growth. I know that Tara's held prominent chief marketing officer roles and also a global leader in payroll consolidation at Skillsoft and, the world's largest e-learning company. So a lot to unpack and a lot of experience that we're bringing to this episode. During her tenure, I know Tara spearheaded a number of transformative initiatives, such as building out multi-country payroll outsourcing. I know you've also led the successful overhaul of content assets and marketing strategies. So with your expertise, Tara, and your achievements as a seasoned expert in marketing and business leadership, hopefully we're going to be able to provide some insights and I'm sure some invaluable knowledge that we'll be able to partake and share here with our international audience. So let's get into it, Tara. It's great to have you here on the show. And
Thanks, Simon.
Start because we've got a lot to talk about, I'm sure. Okay, so let's start with a little bit about Zevo Health, your current role. Could you tell us a bit about it? And I'm particularly interested in the clinical solutions approach and how that differs. Maybe you could get into that a little bit between what traditional healthcare methods, if I could use that term,
sure.
and maybe promoting well-being as well in the workplace, because there's a lot going on at Zevo Health.
Yeah, there is. It's great. It's great crack. So I've been here since October last year. I'm the chief marketing officer, and I came in really to do a piece of work around. Zevo had traditionally been very much an Irish well-being company, where we went in and we kind of ran employee assistance programs and well-being programs and things like that, whether it was yoga, we have an app, all those kind of things, basically to make people feel better. This really jumped in COVID. A lot of people were spending a lot of money during COVID to make sure their people were okay sitting at home on headsets, phones, etc. for the entire day. But our first customer ever came to us 5 years ago and said, listen, we have this group of people called content moderators who spend all day looking at the awful and the egregious that gets thrown in on social media platforms, and basically we need to make sure these guys are protected because they're sitting at home doing it during COVID, and usually we kind of have somebody on the ground for them and we don't have that at the moment. Can you help us? And Richard Murphy, our fabulous CEO, said of course we can, and then went, okay, I need to find a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Turns out the person he set up the business with was one of those people. And we began providing digital therapy for content moderators, right? And the world of content moderation is called trust and safety. And trust and safety is really about protecting the users of any platform anywhere in the world, whether it's an online gaming site or a shopping site or an adult site or one of the big kind of Meta, Facebook, Instagram, that kind of thing. And basically what you're trying to make sure is that any content that's on there is the content that you want to be on there. There's nothing egregious. Egregious is a really long word for something that's really offensive, or there's lots of different definitions of what they look like, ranging from child images to hate speech to bullying to terrorist, all that kind of stuff, all the way through to self-harm imagery and suicidal ideation as well. So Richard really began this 5 years ago as a well-being company, but over the last 5 years we've seen a massive influx of people needing our help working with content moderators, and so last year, when I came in around November timeframe, we made a very deliberate change to be a trust and safety company. So we still work with lots of great wellbeing clients that we work with all the time, but a large proportion of our revenue would be coming from trust and safety clients. And we work with a lot of people with the content moderators on the ground, which is really, really interesting. I think we're very different from a lot of people out there. There's not a lot of people doing what we do. It's not a massive market, as you can imagine, but a lot of people offer digital therapy to the content moderators. Once COVID stopped and everybody went back to the office, our wellbeing specialists, they're called, they're all psychologists, psychiatrists, and they all have master's levels. They've all had experience. They go through a really extensive training program explaining what trust and safety is and the kind of work the content moderators have to do so that they understand how to help them and how to deal with them. And then a lot of other companies in the marketplace would provide a session for you if you were having a bad day. So let's say, Simon, you saw a particularly gratuitous piece of violence and you were like, okay, I can't do any more right now. You would go and have a session with, if I was a psychiatrist with me, we would have a session, that's fine. And then my aim is to get you back into production as quickly as possible so that you can start, getting the queue down, because there's more and more coming behind you as it's kind of running, as the, content is running. Whereas what we try to do is we try to do a huge piece around the proactive piece. So we do a lot of work around resilience. We do a lot of work around specific programs for the team leads and managers to understand where people might be having difficulty or where they might be having some issues. We suggest people spend, rather than just doing a one and done thing, that maybe they do a series of sessions with us on a weekly basis. There's a lot of group interventions we run as well. We kind of keep an audit of how we think people are doing based on surveys, but also based on what our people are hearing on the ground, where they are. So rather than just we only do therapy, there's lots of other kind of services that we do around that.
Yeah, it's fascinating area and a really important area. So thank you for expanding on that, Tara, because these egregious areas that you've sort of expanded on there are some organizations and companies where there are teams of people and their job is to do this all day long, every day. And
Absolutely.
I'll ask you a question about that in a moment, just about the onus on companies and things. But I did want to make the point about Zevo Health. Really, you were talking about one of the founders there as well in your own role, but it really is positioning itself now as almost this sort of golden standard, isn't it? That
Absolutely.
comes to trust and safety, and through these well-being solutions, help people in this environment. You really are driving this, and as you say, there may not be a huge amount of companies doing this at your level. But it really is important. I just wanted to read something from your website, if I can, just for our people maybe listening or watching to this episode, that when Zevo Health talks about empowering the psychological health and safety of content moderation teams by providing world-class ecosystem of human intervention. And the reason I wanted to read that little bit out, because obviously you talk about best practice and technology, but that human intervention, it kind of rang true with me, because we're doing an awful lot of conversations at the moment, and I'm sure it's impacting your business with artificial intelligence, generative AI. And yet there's still this huge requirement to have that human intervention, that qualified human expertise, particularly in the work you're doing.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, because there's two different schools of thought. So some people think that AI can become the therapist, right, which we don't believe in. And other people who are in the market that where they're doing similar services to what we're doing is they use coaches to talk to content moderators. And as you can imagine, if you're a content moderator and you've just come off on October the 7th, the Israel-Hamas incident, where you were seeing GoPro and live streaming of basically a terrorist assault, right? There is no way you can have a conversation with a coach who has done maybe a year's coaching or whatever, right? There is just, these are, levels of concern and impact to your life that you have to have professionals in. And you talked earlier about the kind of the level we're trying to get to, that we're really trying to set. We're calling it internally a platinum level. We have to come up with a better name. That's my job. But really, we want everything to be clinically based. And so we have the best in class of, if you want to make sure your people are protected no matter what they're doing, that we have the, the preventative piece, as well as when you're in crisis, the best people in the world that can sit with you and make sure that that doesn't become something that you're dealing with for a very long time.
And the question I alluded to earlier, I want to come back to that, Tara, that I imagine, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but I imagine there are some companies where it's just obvious that this service must be provided due to the nature of the work that's involved. But is there an onus on a company to provide this level of care and attention and support? And does that differ, region to region, country to country, legal to legal? What's your experience of that from like a global and a local perspective?
Yeah, again, great question. So legally, there's some really interesting things happening in the space around content moderation. There's Digital Services Act, there's about 220 pieces of law going through in the States at the moment. Some people saying there should be no content moderation, some people saying there should be lots, as you can imagine. It's very divided down party lines. But what we do know is that the UK law and the European laws are in place now. And we think this year is going to be a major focus for people on how that law is going to be applied. And while there is nothing in the law yet about how content moderators have to be treated, that is one of the things that we're working really hard on through lobbying to really, what we want to try and get is into the writing of the act, that there actually has to be mental health professionals on site or available through digital therapy so that the content moderators are protected. And like people will say, I mean, people all the time who are like, oh, we're running, we have let's say I run a music site and basically it's just music coming in. And what we're seeing is that even if it's non-egregious content, there's a huge proportion of bad actors using traditional vehicles for non-egregious content for egregious content, right? So you may be thinking you're just going to be listening to audio of music that kids are making that they want to put up repeatedly, but actually you don't know that the next one you're going to listen to is hate speech or terrorism or, a recording of some kind of awful violence, so you just don't know. And you need to make sure that the people that you've trained to do that job have all of that resilience training and know exactly what to do when that comes into them, right? And the olden days of content moderation used to be that people would be hired out of college, people would want to get a job in one of the big tech companies, they'd take the job and then they'd move on after a year. But actually, I think our big focus, especially we do a lot of work with the HR teams when they're hiring people and the kind of job descriptions that they're putting out. And we're really focused on being upfront about what they're going to see and that there's the potential for seeing really egregious content. And but that on the other side, they are making a difference in the world, because there's a real sense from a lot of the content moderators we speak to that they're actually helping, because they're removing all this crap off the internet and they're making sure that the people who are in the images or in the videos or in the audio files even are protected, and that stuff is not going to be continued.
No, thanks. It's a great insight, and I mean, it goes right through, doesn't it, from child safety through to employee safety? Because, as you say, content can be pretending to be one thing and actually doing something else. Then there's this whole freedom of speech debate that goes on, and as you say, there are two sides to that argument, as there are with all good debates and discussions. But ultimately,
and the deep fake is another one, Simon, that's just
I was
come
going
up.
to say with AI and deep fakes, and it's not a human deciding what you listen to next or watch next. It's typically an algorithm now.
Correct.
You like this, so you might like that, and what's coming next may not necessarily be the content that you think that's coming next. So I understand
exactly. And even with deep fakes, right, there's a recording of Joe Biden saying, don't bother using your vote for the midterms, let's hold it for November, as if you just get one vote and you have to decide when you're going to use it. And that's an audio that sounds like Biden, and he uses the kind of words and uses some of the words that he uses and things like that. And the way AI is coming now with especially the video stuff that was released last week by OpenAI, I think it's going to be much more difficult to spot deep fakes, and you're going to need that you're going to need that kind of critical thinking that humans have, that, you know, to really be able to determine what that looks like. And I just think somebody was saying recently in a research piece I was using, that if you think about everything on the internet at the moment is 1% of what it's going to be in 2030, that the other 99% is going to be made up of AI content. So if you think about Sora launched last week, right, which is the new video creator, which amazing videos, like 17-word prompts for the most beautiful, like I could never have imagined. There's this one, if anybody has the chance to look at it, there's this one video of a little monster who's playing with a candle, and it's absolutely stunning. I couldn't have kind of really imagined that a machine would have come up with it. It's almost like machines have souls now, because they came up with this cute little monster. But with a 17-word prompt, they were able to do this, right? So now you have the ability to create hours and hours and hours and hours of content without needing 500 animators sitting in LA or in Korea or wherever, right? So it's just there's going to be a floodgate now of content that is just, you know, everybody is going to start creating tons more content, let alone the bad actors who are going to be piggybacking on that and making sure that they understand. Like, nobody has held up their hand for the Joe Biden piece. That could be external bad actors, external from America. It could be within America. Nobody knows. So it's incredible.
Yeah,
what's coming.
It is fascinating. And you mentioned Sora, the latest offering from AI. And for anybody who has seen those videos on the OpenAI, just look for Sora. You'll find them. They're all over the internet at this stage. And from what we are told, very few people have access at the time of recording. But
it's being red teamed at the moment, right?
Very short prompts and very, very good videos. And it, you know, I saw even Sam Altman from OpenAI has been tweeting, I'm sure, Xing, whatever we call it these days.
Yeah.
He's been sharing, people have been sending him, do a video with this prompt, and he's actually been sharing them. And it's mind-blowing. And another person who springs to mind will be Marcus Brownlee, a big YouTube person who has analyzed some of that footage. And, you know, he's getting into the reflections on the ground, they don't seem to be as rendered as highly in 4K. But to the trained eye, for somebody that lives in AI content generation, I think the human still maybe has a slight chance of recognizing it. But where we are in 3 years or by 2030, I mean, it's going to be anybody's guess whether we can even tell the difference as a species anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, let's bring it back then, because obviously that makes your role really important and really exciting. And I was going to ask you about, for organizations that are facing this challenge, who want to sort of start building out this, what would be the key components, or what would you start talking about when you're talking about implementing this successful clinical solution for workplace well-being? You know, how do they contribute to it? What's the overall employee health and their performance? And how do you start building those key components for that? As you talked about earlier, you know, really focusing on that clinical element of the solution.
Yeah, so we tend to start with a wellbeing audit to get a sense of how people are. And a lot of people come to us thinking everything is A-okay, and we're just kicking off a new engagement, and we usually ask for a wellbeing audit so we get an opportunity to do a survey with content moderators, the trust and safety team, and sometimes the entire organization, depending on who the work is being done for. And then we would reflect the findings of that back to the organization. And in some cases, there's real shock and awe when they see that, because they don't realize the content moderators are going through what they go through. Our wellbeing audits involve a survey, but also qualitative roundtables that we do with a series of people who've responded. And that helps us really get some like really good examples of what's not working, what is working, because in lots of these platforms, you have policies changing by the day. and implementation of those policies can be really challenging if they are changing all the time. So I think that has really helped, that kind of having that as number one, a level set for everybody. So we are all on the same page. So we don't go in and go, we're not seeing what you said we were going to see in the sales engagement. So the wellbeing audit really helps. And then we start to do a series of trainings with everybody, and we do kind of almost an internal marketing piece where we make sure people understand that this service is available to them. And we do a lot of group interventions as well, where we're trying to get groups of content moderators or team leads or trust and safety people together, because a lot of this is sharing how you're feeling really helps, because people are feeling the same thing and people often have the same problems, and we can, reflect that back to the organization as well. And then usually on a quarterly, depending on how egregious the content is, we tend to go back and repeat at least the survey, if not the qualitative bit, on a quarterly basis or half-yearly basis, so that we understand that the mental health, the kind of psychological health and well-being of the moderator is here. We would like it to be here, and we have a plan for it to go there. And there's like a maturity model that we talk through when we work with companies, but it's just to make sure that that's constantly going up, and that if it is reducing, why that is, and what are the alternative things that we can do to make sure that that's supported and pushed up again.
Yeah, that makes an awful lot of sense to me. And the one thing that I want to come back to is we were talking earlier, weren't we, about that sort of people or person expertise, that sort of centered care. And in content production, a lot of the content now is produced, whether it's audio, video, the written word, and a lot of it being co-produced maybe with AI, some of it produced with AI alone. But we are seeing, particularly when it comes to international content or content that needs to be localized in a particular area or region or translated, that we still need what's been referred to as the human in the loop, the expert in the loop. And my question really is, in your area of expertise, that person, that sort of the role that person does, who's at the center of that development and implementation and making sure that there's an effective clinical solution for mental health and well-being, that seems to be of paramount importance. And you said earlier something to that effect when you were saying, look, you don't think it's going to be replaced by AI. Could you maybe expand on your experience there?
Yeah, I think the piece there is, so one of the things we do is there's a kind of a focus for us on being on site, because while we know the preventative stuff can be done digitally, and like it can be done digitally, but when a crisis actually happens, it can be very helpful to have a person actually physically there. But if you think about the requirement of a therapist or a counselor, basically they have to, give you empathy, they have to, reflect back humanity. There's a lot of, and if you think about well-being as a whole, right, that's about anything to do with your life. It's not just the thing you do, unless you've got severance. It's not the thing you do when you go into the office for 8 hours a day. It can involve your relationship with your partner or your kids or your boss or something going on all over the place. Like well-being is multifaceted. And we would see, maybe 30 to 40% of the people the issues that are raised with our well-being specialists are actually nothing to do with the content at all. It's work issues or it's home issues. But in a lot of cases, if you're watching content that is egregious, it amps up the anxiety, or it amps up your inability to deal with something like that, or it decreases the resilience that you have to deal with when something goes wrong. So our thing, when we think about it, it's a big holistic kind of, we think about it in terms of a 360, where it's not like the content might be this much of it, but there's all this other stuff, some of which is to do with the company, my boss, the person who sits beside me, whatever that is. But you need to be able to kind of open that whole thing up into that conversation you're having with another human. And I think AI is great. And I personally am a massive fan of AI. I think it's going to change marketing within a very, very short period of time. But there is really well-known biases in AI, right? Because of the people who designed the systems and the stuff it's been fed with. So last week, some AI image creator was asked to give standard images for a C-suite of a company, and the CMO and the CHRO was a woman, everybody else was a white man. And it's like, oh, really, could we not have fixed that back at the get-go, So I think that whole empathetic piece is, and it is about human connection. Anybody who's done therapy before knows they do really, really well when they connect with the therapist, irrespective of, the research says, irrespective of what type of therapy you're doing, if you connect with a therapist on a human level, you can do some phenomenal work.
No, 100%. And I think people who have experience in that area, they might go through a number of therapists before they find the right one that really clicks for them, right? So
yeah. And it's that kind of healing through shared existence, right? It's like, even though I haven't seen the horrific things you've seen, I understand, because I work in trust and safety, and I've talked to lots and lots of content moderators about their experiences. So I know how to get you out of that and to make sure that doesn't become part of your long-term, memories, basically,
Yeah, and I suppose it brings me on to something else I wanted to ask you, if I can, Tara, which is about, although you've got this sort of broad approach, and it can be many factors that feed into this, not just that sort of content piece, but do you see commonalities between some of your customers and some of the companies that you help? Are there some common well-being challenges that you address through, the solutions that Zevo Health brings to the table?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of challenges on this side. One of them is, we've seen a lot with the layoffs recently of, D&I teams being let go, and, well-being budgets being cut and things like that. But we believe in Zevo, this is just one of those things that you absolutely have to spend money on. I think we're going to see that where people are genuinely trying to do the best by the content moderator and provide the best care, that when legal challenges come, it will impact the level of the payout for the content moderator, right? I really do, because I think it will decrease. We definitely talk to the organization as decreasing the risk. The big thing is called vicarious trauma, which is when I see something traumatic happening to somebody or something, I absorb that and I take that on, and it becomes my trauma, right? So because I'm sitting beside it or watching it or whatever, even if I only watch it for a little while, it can become, and we've, Dr. Michelle Teo, our clinical director, has done a lot of work on that kind of vicarious trauma. And also there's one of the big challenges content moderators have, and you talked about it earlier about the language piece and culture, right? Is that there's contextual ambiguity, right? So, me saying the F word in Ireland is very different from me saying the F word in America, as I found out. And there's a totally different contextual piece of somebody doing yoga with their forearms uncovered here in the Western world versus in other parts of the world, right? So having somebody, we have people in pretty much every part of the globe at this stage. We're starting to build up our Southeast Asia side of the business at the moment. And one of the things that we believe is really important is that you have people talking to you in your native language, right? So in some cases, you have people who are reviewing content and using Google Translate to figure out what that is saying in their language, right? But you miss a huge amount of nuance there, right? So what we insist on is that whatever language the person is most comfortable in is the language that they do therapy in. And we think that's incredibly important. So that context ambiguity is incredibly important, because the context of something can be, and that's the reason AI is so bad at content moderation, because you give it the rules and all of a sudden it sees a leg picture and it sends it away and it trashes it, right? Whereas a nuanced human can tell really quickly, or they can understand sarcasm, right? I don't think AI understands sarcasm yet, So all of that stuff I think is going to be really important. And then the other piece that I think a lot of our customers have in common is policy changes like all the time, right? So bad actors are finding new ways to come in on stuff. Like every day there's new things happening. So deep fakes weren't a thing like a year ago or whatever. They weren't a good thing a year ago, right? Where you could very easily see something was a deep fake, whereas now they're becoming incredibly nuanced and really smart. And there's going to be much more of those sorts of things coming that we can't even imagine. Like a thing happened a couple of weeks ago where in Hong Kong, a very unfortunate employee got on the phone with three members of his team, including the CFO of the business, and paid over 25 million to a bad actor. And basically, the three members of the team were deep fakes, but this guy thought he was on the phone. He thought he was on a video call with three people who he speaks to lots of the time, you know? So the fact that they can do that, and the fact that bad actors have figured out that you can make money that way, you best believe. Or like I get emails several times a day from my CEO saying, I need you to buy me gift cards. That is now out of date. Everybody knows that's a scam. But this thing of me seeing Richard on the phone to me saying, no, I really want you to pay this, is just extraordinary. So much so that everybody is now saying you have to set up safe words, so that if I want you to really do something, you say, what's the safe word we agreed, so that you know it's really me.
Yeah, and I've seen companies being targeted. But sorry, I've seen employees of companies being targeted, particularly
Yeah,
people that are there maybe 3 months or less. Seem to be a very hot target area for
and
that
they're
kind
really
of
nervous.
deep fake
Yeah,
at the
that they're
moment.
going to
Yeah,
mess up.
yeah,
Yeah, it's extraordinary. But the idea that you could deep fake three employees that I would be used to speaking to,
in real
I
time.
just don't understand how.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
it's extraordinary that that is happening, you know? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening, but the vicarious trauma would be the big thing, right? But our view would be that, you know, if you can get someone to, content moderation has a lot of challenges. There's attrition, there's productivity, people go out sick because of what they've seen. And our view is that, and we've seen it working with teams, if you can get people to do mental health caretaking on a weekly basis, they don't then leave for 3 weeks in 4 months, or they don't leave the business in its entirety in 9 months, and then you have to rehire again, right? So we actually believe content moderation is a phenomenal profession to be supported. It's an incredibly important profession. With AI, you'll be very easily to take out the really obvious stuff that is and is not, but all that great stuff in the middle is going to be more nuanced and will need more human intervention. So we definitely see it as kind of here to stay, and we think the well-being element is imperative, you know. And the other thing is that some people provide well-being, but it was made really clear to people when they joined that they were not to take advantage of the well-being, not with companies we work with, I just want to say. Whereas we feel that we make a really big play out of making it, explaining to the team leads how this is actually going to help them long term if their people do come to us for a half an hour to an hour once a week, rather than go out sick in 4 months' time for 6 days because they can't cope with what they've seen.
Yeah, or as you say, leave, and then you've just got
Yeah,
to go back and start again, right? So
and start training, and it takes, you know, weeks or months for people to get into production where they're kind of doing the normal number of tickets a day and stuff like that, you know, because there is that other, like, there is a lot of pressure on content moderators from a productivity perspective. So because there's always a queue there, and, you know, there's also this peer letting down, where if I step out for an hour because I'm having a really bad time, I'm letting you down, Simon, if you're sitting beside me, because you're now having to deal with the queue. Whereas we do a lot of work explaining how this is actually a really, really important thing.
no, I couldn't agree more. And I think like we were talking many years ago about the explosion of content and how
Yeah,
content is just exploded everywhere. And there's so
absolutely.
much user generated content, there's corporate generated content, you know, small business, there's, you know, influencers, there's people creating their own content and putting it out there. And now we have AI on the top of that, creating more content than we could ever have imagined. And I suppose the point I'm getting to is that you mentioned Dr. Michelle there and the great work she's doing.
Yeah,
It leads nicely into the question about the fact that as this scenario continues to grow and evolve, as workplace well-being probably becomes so important, so critical. Not that it
Yeah.
isn't now, but just the sheer fact that this whole landscape is evolving dramatically.
Yeah.
What do you see as maybe some of the more promising, or some of the more innovative advancements maybe that are coming from your side of things, from a clinical solutions, or maybe to look at it another way, what do you think shapes the future of mental health and well-being in this professional environment?
Yeah. So I think VR and AR is going to be really important in this world. I think with the Apple Pro headsets now, there is, for the first time within maybe 18 months, a sense that there might be, one in every household, or, you could certainly have some in the office. I've worked with a company called Zevo Health in Ireland. This element of their business is called Shine VR, and they did a really interesting piece of work for a company. There were a BPO who were working with content moderators in a large tech company, and they basically may encourage them to sit with one of the headsets. It wasn't an Apple headset because they hadn't been invented at that stage. They weren't released. And they basically got them to do some critical thinking skills, some, just really simple games and things like that. But what it helped make sure that what they'd seen during the day was not going into their long-term memory, right? So if they finished up their day with this, they got about 7,000 hours of usage. They got a 70% reduction in stress and a 58% increase in wellness, which is phenomenal for wellness, right? Seeing that level of a lift is just extraordinary with content moderators, because they're really cynical bunch given what they see every day, as you can imagine, what they see coming in. So I think that's going to be really interesting, really interesting. But I think there's going to be a lot more widespread adoption, and I think there is going to have to be legislation to support the treatment of content moderators, and a little bit like the doctors in the NHS, junior doctors in the NHS not being allowed to do more than however many hours they do on a weekly basis. I think there will be certain things that say best in class support looks like this. And we recommend, and we're doing various pieces of research at the moment to really track how people are doing longer term, and that it does increase productivity and it does extend people staying. So like within the next kind of year or so, we'll have a lot of those results out. We're kind of making sure that we have quite a bit of content and research to look at there. But I think that's going to be part of the requirement, is that it actually becomes a piece of the legislation, that it says this is what you have to provide for people who are working on egregious to highly egregious content.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and thank you for sharing that as well, because you mentioned Niall O'Driscoll there, who's the Chief Executive Officer.
That's right.
Would
And
you
Andrew
believe?
Jenkinson, yeah.
Yeah, Andrew as well. Yeah, I mean, it's a small world because he's actually been on this show.
Get out.
He was
That's them.
episode 119, just for anybody watching or listening to
Oh,
this.
fantastic.
So go back and check it out, because we actually went into a little bit about what he's actually doing in the space of AR and XR from that Shine VR offering that he has, and just the incredible results that he's seeing from a
Yeah.
patient side. I mean,
It's extraordinary.
mind-blowing.
And they
Yeah.
have a new thing coming that's top secret around pain, which I won't even
Okay.
talk about, which is like I saw a sneak preview because I have chronic back pain. I saw a sneak preview last week, and it is stunning. That's all I can
Interesting,
say.
yeah. And I know, and I'm sure you know, Dr. Martin Curley as well, used to be the
Yes.
HSE digital guru, and he's doing some phenomenal work
Yeah.
now, through not just through the university, but through the speaking that he's doing as well, in terms of how this technology is really helping us to make progress for the good guys out there. So hopefully,
Absolutely. Yeah.
people like Niall and others, certainly worth checking out. But thank you for mentioning those, Tara, because that's an
Full
interesting.
circle right there.
Yeah, right there. Yeah, that's lovely. Well, look, before we run out of time, I want to ask you, we've touched on a lot in this episode, and there's so much that we're not going to get to. Maybe we get you back for another episode in the future. But
That'd be lovely.
is there anything else you'd like to share with our worldwide audience? about the areas we've touched on, about the company, or anything sort of related to that field just before we wrap up today? What would be your parting sort of thoughts or areas?
Yeah, I suppose the big thing for me is that rather than content moderation being this, thing that's hidden behind closed doors that people don't want to talk about, it's actually an incredible profession. And these guys are really amazing people that do this every day. There's a lot of people who are, who speak about content moderators in a really condescending way as like the heroes of the internet, but they kind of are. And they need to be supported as such because they are seeing the worst of humanity every day, right? And 8 hours a day, So I think if you're working with content moderators, we believe that the only way to make sure that they are protected from what they're seeing, because we believe it's a job that's not going to go away anytime soon. I think it's incredibly important that that they're supported through the best in class, which is us, luckily. So you can just call us.
Very good. Well, that's great, Tara, and what a great point to end on. I just want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to us around the world. Thanks very much to Tara O'Sullivan for joining us, and make sure that you tune in again to VistaTalks so you can watch or listen to the next VistaTalks show, where once again we'll be discussing some interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world, just like Tara. Thank you, Tara. It's been a real pleasure today.
Thanks, Simon.